Okay, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Zevachim. We're going to be learning Ayin, starting at the bottom of Ayin Amud Aleph. We'll be learning Ayin Amud Beis, of course. Thrillingly, we'll be learning Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph, and then we'll be learning toward the bottom of Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. There's a chance I won't be here tomorrow night. Don't yet know my schedule. I certainly won't be here Wednesday night. But these dapim are short, so Mir Hashem will be able to stay on track and maybe even jump ahead a little bit. Yesterday, as you may recall, we were discussing a flurry of psukim that spoke about the word treifa. We were trying to figure out the shita, primarily of Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Meir, how they understand these psukim, and we were trying to understand their machlokas. The Mishnah at the bottom of Samach Tes Amud Aleph had indicated there's a machlokas about a case of malak v'nimtzeis treifa, that if a kohen does malika, thumbnail into the back of the neck, kills the animal. And only afterwards we find out if there's a treifa. We saw there was a three-way machlokas Tanai, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi. So yesterday we spent some time analyzing that, and one of the psukim that we were dealing with was a pasuk from Vayikra Zayin, Vayikra Perek Zayin. Let's learn the pasuk, and then we will analyze the pasuk. Says the Gemara, says the pasuk in Vayikra Zayin Chav Daled, Vayikra Zayin Chav Daled, V'chelev nevela, V'chelev treifa ye'aseh, L'chol melacha ve'achol lo sochli, you should not eat it. It says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, 7 lines from the bottom of the page at the Brisa. Tanu Rabbanan, the pasuk says, "V'chelev nevela v'chelev treifa." What kind of animal are we talking about when we're analyzing its chelev? So it says the Gemara, the Brisa, it's a longer Brisa. The Gemara says, "V'chelev behema tahora hakasu medaber." We're talking about an animal that is an animal that is tahora, and even though the animal died and is a nevela, the chelev is not mitame. That's the din that we're learning about over here. Because what does the pasuk say? V'chelev nevela v'chelev treifa, but the halachos are not the same, which is that if the animal died, and it's a nevela, so fine, you can't eat the flesh, but you can eat the chelev. So it says the Brisa, how do you know? Ata omer b'chelev behema tahora kas medaber, that you're talking about a kosher animal like a cow. But perhaps maybe we're talking about a horse. Maybe we're talking about another animal that's not so kosher. So it says the Gemara, why would we assume that? Because Amris, I might have thought that tir michlal shchuta, betir michlal chelev, that we have something that's mitahir a shchita and something that's mitahir chelev. How so? Mak shetir michlal shchuta, that when one does shchita, where do you do shchita? What animal do you do shchita on? Only bitahora v'lo bitmeya. What happens if I shecht a pig? What happens if I shecht a horse? I shecht a rabbit? I shecht a whatever? Pasha nothing. Just saying the animals. So shchita only is employed over there. Then the only havamina of discussing when perhaps chelev is going to be mutter, it has to be in a genre of food that is bichlal mutter. So that's what the Gemara is saying over here, that we have to have something equivalent between the world of shchita and the world of chelev. Says the Gemara, Oklach l'derech zu. Perhaps we could flip the whole script. The first part of this brisa indicated that we're only talking about the chelev of an animal that is tahora. Maybe, says the Gemara, that no, maybe tiher michlal nevela v'tir michlal chelev. Maybe we should be comparing nevela and chelev. How so? Makshetir michlal nevela b'tmeya v'lo b'tahora. And Rashi here points out that we're talking about an of tameh. So if we have an of tameh, as we learned the other day, that if you do shchita on an of tameh, on an ostrich, on an eagle, so in those cases the animal is no longer tameh b'nevela. So then, af kshetir michlal chelev, then maybe when we're talking about chelev also, we're just like we're talked about with an of tameh, that the shchita of an of tameh removes the status of nevela. Perhaps the same thing is true by chelev. Af kshetir michlal chelev b'tmei v'lo b'tahora. And Amris, what's the svara to say such a thing, that we're focused on behema tameya instead of behema tamora? Amris, what would the argument be? When we go in this direction, he tahora. So we have two very, very different mahalchim. One says it's a mahalach that we're dealing with animals that are tahora. One says tmei. So says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar treifa. What does the word treifa teach me? And let's remember the pasuk that we're talking about is Vayikra Zayin. So what does Vayikra Zayin tell me? That the word treifa teaches us Mishi Yesh B'mina treifa. So we're only talking about a case where there is a min that is in fact treif. And there's a little bit of a change in the girsa here. Yatzisa tmeya she'ein b'mina treifa, and that takes us to the next line, that we don't have a din of treifa by an animal that is tmeya. We say that pigs are treif. No, they're tmeya. They're not, it's not, again, we use it almost socially. It's treif. You're not allowed to eat it. We say it, flippantly, non-halachically. It says the Gemara, we can't be talking about in the pasuk of b'chelev nevela b'chelev no chelev nevela b'chelev treifa. That pasuk cannot be talking about an animal that's tameh because there is no treifa by an animal that's tameh. Must be talking about a treifa. Says the Gemara, v'lo otzi es achaya sheyesh b'mina treifa. And what about a case of a chaya? Maybe I shouldn't talk about that case because sheyesh b'mina treifa. Below oti es hachaya, and I won't talk about a chaya sheyesh b'mina treifa because I can make a chaya treif. Says the Gemara, Talmud ve'echol lo sochlu, mishachel ba asu aser uvesara mutter. The only thing that we're talking about, as the pasuk states that you're not allowed to eat it, is where the chelev is aser and the animal is mutter. But by venison, by a deer, that's not true, because by a deer, both the animal's mutter and the chalev is mutter. The only time chalev is going to be usher is on a behema, shtei kloyos, whatever, the diaphragm area of the, whatever, that's when we're going to have problems. But it's not true by a chaya. Therefore, yatsa chaya, the deer and animals like a deer, shechel b'usar mutter, they're not part of this discussion. So the pasuk can't be talking about that. So what seems to be the conclusion of the Gemara, and we're on Ayin Amud Beis about 8 lines down, is that the pasuk that we learned in Vayikra Zayin of V'chelev Nevela V'chelev Treifa is talking about a case of an animal that is tahora, but its chelev is tmeya. That's what we're talking about. So it can't be talking about a treifa. It can't be talking about a tmeya like a pig or a cow. And it can't be talking about a chaya because the chelev of the chaya is always mutter. So that can't be. It must be talking about this middle of the road case of a behema that has the capacity to be a treifa. And normally the chelev is asura, but there's a pasuk that's a matir. So Amar le Rabbi Yaakov bar Abba le Rava Elameat, if all of this is true, then we have a problem. Nevelas behema tahora hi demitama, that the corpse of an animal that is tahora, let's say like a cow, that's when we have a din of tuma by nevela. Nevelas behema tmeya lo mitama. Then it seems to be that the nevela, the corpse of a large animal that's tameh, has no tumas nevela. And that is actually not true. So therefore, the Gemara says, Amar le, kama save shabishtuba. So many people have made a mistake like this. We're not talking about large animals, says the Gemara. Seifa asan l'nevelas oftame. We're only talking about nevelas oftame. We are not talking about a large animal. So therefore, that is his taich, is that we're only talking about the nevelas oftame. Says the Gemara about a quarter of the way down, heading toward the end of the perek. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, lo tiher Reb Meir Ella, lo tiher Reb Meir Ella b'tmimin. So says the Gemara as follows: when did we say it was not going to be metame as nevela? When do we say that there's no tumas nevela? So Rabbi Yochanan says that's only b'tmimin, if the animal is tamid. The animal is tamim, so then we are able to say the animal is perfect, and then the shechita was done fine. Then there's no din of nevela. El aval bebale mumin, but if the animal had a mum, lo, I wouldn't have said the animal is pater from nevela. That would be what Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rav Meir. Rabbi Elazar says no. Amar afilu bale mumin. He would even say that even if the animal is a bal mumin, it was shechted. So what would we say? We would say that still the fact is that there's no tumas nevela. Itmar Nami, we actually have this as well in the Amoraim, not just quoting from Rav Meir, not just quoting from Rav Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, but from other Amoraim as well. Amar Rabibi, Amar Rabbi Elazar, it's the same person in the end of the day, because Rabbi Elazar was in the previous one. Mitaher Hoya Rav Meir beba'alei mumen, and that tracks, because previously Rabbi Elazar was the one who said that afilu beba'alei mumen, that an animal that's shechted would not have a din of tumas nevela. And ve'afilu be'avazim v'tarnagolim. Even with animals like ducks, even with animals that are really not shaykh to korbanos. So we have a chiddush tekadin that we're able to apply the fact that nevela, that the status of nevela doesn't apply to a bird that's, as long as it's been shechted, then there's no din of nevela. Says the Gemara, what about a case of killing an animal with a rifas egla? In the end of Parshas Shoftim, the halacha is about the egla arufa, the din in Chumash, that if a body was found between two cities, the city to which the body was closer had a din of doing this process of egla arufa. We've spoken about this in previous Maseches, and basically the animal is killed by hacking it at its neck from the top across the spine, whatever the details are. Let's say that we do egla arufa. Does that remove the status of nevela? So it says the Gemara, boy Rabbi Yirmiyah, oraf eis. If I do arifas egla, but not on an egel, not on a calf, but on an eis, on a goat. Wrong animal. Weird type of killing. What's the din? Avazim v'tarnagolim taimamai. Why is it that we said that animals that were not shaykh by korbanos, why did we say that they were going to not have a din of nevela? Because dimina de ofos ninu. At the end of the day, they're foul. They're not much different than chickens. So therefore, we're willing to aval eis, but a goat, lav mina de eglu. That's not a calf. And the calf was very specific. So, mehechatesi, we should distinguish between a chicken and a duck. But the pasuk in Chumash by Egla Rufa was super specific, which is that it has to be an Egla, and you did an A's. So maybe we shouldn't compare them. Maybe we should say that the Avazim and Tarnagolim, by the Avazim and Tarnagolim, we're going to say they're close enough. But perhaps when it comes to an A's relative to an Egla by Egla Arufa, or maybe we should not say that way. Odilma, Mina de Behemoth, or maybe we should be Mekel, and maybe we should say that just like an egla is a small animal, so too an A's is a small animal, and they're the same. So Yosef Rav Dimi v'Kamar lahashmaisa. Rav Dimi was learning up the sugya. Amar le'Abai, he says to him, Michlal, there's an inference over here that de egla arufa tehorahi. If you're asking about an A's, if you're asking about a goat, whether or not egla arufa will be matahiret from nevela, what is implied about a classical case, not of A's with an arufa, but a classical case of egla arufa. So l'chora, it seems to be that that's tahora, because you didn't ask that question. You asked about an A's, a deviation. Egla arufa, we're not asking about, only ireth an A's. So Elamai must be that the egla arufa itself is tahora. Amar le'in, absolutely, that's correct. In a case of egla arufa, the animal is not a nevela. Amr debei Rav Yanai kapara ksiba kikochim. That when it talks about the egla arufa, the Torah refers to it with the pasuk, and this is a pasuk in Dvarim Chaf Aleph. Kaper le'amecha Yisrael asher padisa Hashem ve'al titein dam naki b'karav amecha Yisrael v'nikaper lehem hadam. Multiple references to the word kaper. So in regards to egla arufa, we see the word kaper multiple times, which indicates to us some level of atonement, and therefore we would also assume that it's not an avela. So we asked our question about the A's. As of now, the Gemara hasn't answered that question, but what we inferred from the A's getting the hatchet at the top of the neck is that certainly if it's a calf, an egel, then it would be tahora from nevela. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Masi Reb Nasan Avua de Rav Huna. Rav Nasan, the father of Rav Huna, asked from a brisa. The pasuk says in our pasuk in Vayikra Zayin, ve'achol lo sochluhu, that you're not supposed to eat it. Again, that's our pasuk. V'chelev nevela v'chelev treifa ye'aseh l'chol malacha ve'achol lo sochluhu. Ein li elo chelev she'aser be'achila u'moter be'hana'a. I only know that we're talking about chelev, that you're not allowed to eat, and that's mutter behana, meaning an animal unlike a shor haniskal, which is aser behana. What about chelev shel shor haniskal be'egla arufa minayin? Talmud lomar kol chelev. The word kol is a very inclusive word, so we therefore assume that even if there is an iser hana status, like there would be with shor haniskal, that's all fine and good. Because of the pasuk of kol. If you want to say, like we wanted to say earlier, that when our inference that we made earlier from Rav Dimi and Abaye, If you want to say that the egla arufa, when it's killed, that it's tahora, there's no din of nevela, he tahora v'chel batame, you would have had a havamina that the animal is tame, but that the animal is tahor, excuse me, and the chaylev is tame. That's backwards. That's backwards. If the animal is tahor, for sure the chaylev is tahor. Ella, that can't be. So says the Gemara, Heicha de'araf me'arif, where the animal was killed in this way. Lo itzrichale. We know that its chaylev is going to be tahor in that case. What case was the brisa talking about? Ki itzricha heicha de'shachta mishchat. Let's say you had an egla arufa, and instead of killing it the correct way, which is egla arufa, hatch it at the back of the neck, what you do instead is you shecht it normally. So what about this case? So says the Gemara, "V'tehani le'shchita l'tara midin nevela." You think that shchita v'tehani le'shchita l'tara midin nevela? Pashut that it's going to help in that case. The shchita will be matarit. Egla rufa is the chiddush. Pashut that shchita will work. So the Gemara, lo tzricha shemesa. We're talking about a case scenario where the animal dies of natural causes. So then that's our case. Says the Gemara, if that's where we have our unique heter, then michlal de mechayim asur, that implies that the animal will have a status of isser when it's still alive. The starting status is isser. Says the Gemara that's absolutely true. Then the Gemara says a cryptic line, Amar Rav Yanai, gvul shamati v'shachachti. I heard literally a boundary, but that's not what it means here. It means I learned some idea and I forgot it. B'nispin chevrai l'neighbor. All my friends gathered together to say that Yeridasa l'nachal eson hi osarta. Only when the animal is brought to nachal eson, which is the pasuk in Chumash again in Dvarim Chaf, that's when the iser kicks in. So we kind of got off the rails a little bit when we're talking about egla arufa. We didn't even answer our question. We were trying to figure out about an A's. We never really answered it, but we do know that we're talking about a case of Mesa, where the Egla Arufa died naturally. That's the case that we were trying to figure out. Hadron Aloch Atas Of Baruch Hashem. We finished the 7th parak of Maseches Zevachim, moving right on to the parak called Kol HaZvachim. And now what we're going to do in this Mishnah is talk about animals that got mixed up together. This is easier than some of the other work we've been doing. We're at the bottom of Ayin Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom of the page at the new parak. Kol hazvachim, any korbanos, shenis arvu, that got mixed into bechataos hamesos, o beshor haniskal. So you have all of these animals that are good animals, and they got mixed up with the chatas hamesos, which is one of 5 different animals that is a chatas that has to die, they have to be left to die. O beshor haniskal, or if a shor haniskal got mixed up in many different korbanos, afilu achaz beribo, even one in many. So says the Gemara, Yamusu Kulan. The truth is, I said this a little bit wrong. The way the Mishnah reads is that if one good animal gets mixed up with many chataos hamesos, so that means, let's say I have one good animal, my cow Betsy gets mixed up with 1,000 animals that are chataos mesos. So the halacha is Yamusu Kulan. All of them have to die. We're going to question this in the Gemara when we get to Ayin Aleph Amud Beis, which is not that far away. Says the Gemara, what about nisarvu b'shor shenevda bo avera? What about an animal if it gets mixed up with animals with which an avera was done? Oh, turning to the top of Ayin Aleph Hamad Aleph, shehenis esa adam al pi eid echad, or it was a shor that killed only with one aid. So it's actually not a proper shor haniskal. A shor haniskal needs 2 aidim. Oh, al pi habailim, or an animal that was indicted by his own master. So the animal killed, but it's his bailim, his owners were the ones who said so. That's also not a proper shor niskal. Biroveya, an animal that sodomized, vinirba, an animal that was the victim of sodomy. Bimuktzah, an animal that was set aside for avodah zarah. V'ne'evad, an animal that was worshipped. Be'esnan, an animal that was given as payment for prostitution. Umechir, an animal that was swapped out for a dog, which is umechir keleb, as it says in the pasuk. Bikilaim, an animal that was crossbred in a way that it should not have been. Uvetrefa, an animal that was obviously a trefa. Uveyotze dofen, an animal that was born via C-section. In all of these cases, unlike the Resha of our Mishnah from the bottom of Ayin Amud Beis, where if one animal gets mixed up with all of the chataos hamesos or with shor haniskal, they have to die. With all of these other cases, the halacha is different. Says the Gemara on the top of Ayin Aleph Amud Beis, Yiru Anshi Istavu V'Yimachru, that they should graze until they become tameh, and then they should be sold. V'Yavi Bidmei HaYafeh Shebehen Me'oso Hamin, and then you should buy a nice animal, a nicer animal than the one that you had from the same min, from the same type of animal that you had. That's case two. Nis'arvu bechulin tamimin. What if the animals that you have got mixed up with regular animals? So says the Gemara, Yimachru hachulin tzorche osoamin. You have to sell these animals for the sake of that same brand of animal that you got all mixed up. What about kadshim b'kadshim? Let's say we have two animals, one kadshim and another, and they get mixed up. So it depends. Min b'mino. If we have two types of two types of kachim that are the same, such as an ola and an ola, my ola and your ola get mixed up. Then the Kohen should just say, if this one's for Phil, then that one's for Gerald. If this one's for Gerald, then that one's for Phil. What about kachim b'kachim min b'she'eno mino? Let's say we have two types of kachim. We have shlamim and an ola, and they get mixed up. That's different. There we can't just say, tell the Kohen to have a kavanah for everybody else. Yiru adshi istavu. We should wait until it should graze until it develops a mum. And the word v'yimachru is added in, as you can see on the side, al yadei hashlamos, that perhaps it's sold also. V'yavi b'dmei hayafe shebehen. And these animals are mixed. You have a shlamim and you have an ola. So you take you take the monies and you buy a very expensive version of, let's say, the shlamim. Uvidmei hayafe shebehen means that. And each of them you have to buy the best that you can of each one. And that means that there's some extra money. Let's say that my shlamim was $90 and your ola was $90. They got mixed up. So now I have to buy the best of each genre. Now each one is $100. V'yafsid hamosar mibeso. Each person has to lose a little bit of money in order to get the best possible animal. Lastly, in our Mishnah, nis'arvu bebechoru v'maiser. Let's say something gets mixed up with a bechor and maiser. Yiru achi istavu. We should wait until they develop a mum. V'yochlu kibechor. And then they can be eaten like a bechor, can be eaten like meiser. We'll discuss a lot of this in the Gemara. Hakol yechol lis'arev, and all things can be subject to the rules of our Mishnah of things getting all mixed up and confused. However, there are some animals that if they get confused, they're mutually exclusive and there is no bittul. What is that? Chutz min hachatas v'ha'asham, because those animals are not interchangeable. Now the Gemara asks a very clever question and says, "My afilu." It's very interesting. If you go back to the beginning of the Mishnah, it said something very weird. It said that if a regular animal gets mixed up with all of the chatos hamesos, afilu achas beribo, even 1 in 10,000, it's going to become tummy. So you have one chulin animal, one regular animal, that gets mixed up with 10,000 animals that are chatos mesos. Says the Gemara, my afilu pashat, that's going to be the case. All the animals are chatos mesos. So you have one good animal that became lost in thousands of other non-kosher animals. Obviously, all those animals are not going to work out. My afilu, asks the Gemara, halfway down on Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, it's backwards. Hachi kamar. Let's say you have 10,000 regular animals, and then you lose within that pack a chatos hamesos, an animal that's a chatos that really should die, or a shora niskal, afilu echad beribo, even if there are 10,000 good animals to outweigh the ones that you lost that are usher, it doesn't matter. Yamusu kulan. There's no bittul. There's no bittul. The only time we really say bittul is when there's what we call when there's no be'en, when I can't see that which I lost. So let's say a person drops a piece of mozzarella cheese in cholent. If I can see the mozzarella cheese, there's no bittul. Take it out. If I can't see the milk or the cheese that was melted in there, so then obviously that's different, and then we apply the rules of bittul. And here there is no bittul because I can still see the animal. Says the Gemara, this can't be what our Mishnah means, because if it's true, Tanina Chadazimno, we already learned this. Where do we know this from? So this is from a Bryce and Tmura. Kol ha'asur in legabe mizbeach, anything that's going to be asur as it relates to the mizbeach, osrin bekol shehem, there's no bittul. I don't care what the ratios are. Harovea v'hanirba as examples. Those are examples where there's no bittul. So you're trying to tell me that my afilu, why does the Mishnah? No, it doesn't. You learned it the wrong way. Because if what you're trying to say is that we have all of these, if we have all of these animals that are kosher, and we lose one chatas hamesa inside, that all of them are going to be yes. So we learned that already in Tmura. So Amar Rav Ashi, Amrisa l'shmaisa kami de Rav Simi. He brought this shaila in front of Rav Simi. Ve'atzricha, and he explained why we needed both Mar Makomos. Dei mehasam havamina hanimili legvoa. If we were talking about only the brisa, so that was talking only about the mizbeach lechora, about things that are very holy. Aval lehedyot, for things that are not so holy. Let's say I just want to do a regular shechita emalo. I might have thought there was no such restriction, and perhaps we could be more makel that we could sell it. The imehacha, if we only had our case of our Mishnah, where we learn that if there is one chulin that is mixed in, if there's one chatas hamesa that's mixed into 10,000 regular animals, havamina hani hu da asuri hanan, who perhaps because there's an isra, because our Mishnah talks about a case of shora niskal. Aval hani, but the second case, the case from Tmura, where it talks about kol ha'asur and legabe mizbeach emalo, I might have thought that the halacha doesn't apply over there, and therefore, says Rav Ashi, we need both Mar Mekomos. We need our Mishnah, where we see that even if one Chatas HaMesa gets mixed into 10,000 good animals, that they all die. And we also need the Gemara and Tmura that says, Kol ha'oser legabe mizbech, oser mechol shein, like a Rovei and Nirva, because without both of them, I would have made a mistake. Tzrichi. And we'll stop right here at the Lavi Surei Hananin, who on the bottom of Ayin Aleph Hamid Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.